In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you the #1 psychological tool that you can use to help you reach your full potential. And the value of this tool is often overlooked. And in fact, when I tell you what it is, you might be like, really, Emerald? Are you sure that's going to help me? But if you're someone who values personal growth, self-actualization, and you have really big goals that you want to achieve, then this psychological tool is imperative to add to your tool belt. And the reason why that is because whenever you get to a place in your journey where you're stuck or you're experiencing a bottleneck, this psychological tool is unparalleled in its ability to get you unstuck. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you what that psychological tool is, why it's so effective, and I'll also be sharing with you towards the end of the video a simple but effective process for adding this tool to your tool belt. So without further ado, what is that psychological tool? Well, like I said, most people overlook this and prepare to be underwhelmed, but the psychological tool that I'm referring to is compassion, and specifically the practice of 100% unconditional compassion. That means universal compassion towards every other person. And you might hear this and go, okay, Emerald, this is really flowery, unactionable advice. This isn't going to work at all. But trust me and hear me out on this one, because I do mean that this is the most powerful tool that you can use to get yourself to your big goals and to reach your full potential. And the reason why is because compassion, specifically the practice of 100% unconditional compassion, gives you a mindset shift that enables you to see the root causes of problems, including problems that come up that hold you back from your goals. So to give an example, let's say that I'm trying to launch a business. And as I'm trying to launch it, I'm dealing with all kinds of procrastination and friction and self-sabotage. And if I don't look to myself with compassion, and compassion in a nutshell is about understanding, and I look to myself more from a place of condemnation and being extra hard on myself, and I go, oh, I'm so lazy, I need to stop being lazy, stupid, stupid, stupid me, I'm so lazy. If that's the case, I'm going to be trying to motivate myself through negative self-talk and through brute force of will to get to my goals. But if I look to myself from a place of compassion and I go, okay, I see that there's procrastination coming up. Maybe there's some laziness even coming up. Where's that coming from? So if I believe that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with me, there must be some good reason for it to be coming up. And so then I seek to understand myself instead of condemning myself. So looking to myself compassionately helps me go from a symptom level awareness of that procrastination to a root level awareness. And maybe as I look at the roots, I find that there's part of me that's afraid of failure. And it's like, because I'm afraid of failure, that's why I'm procrastinating and stalling on everything. And so what I need to do is I need to actually tune into that and see, do I have any needs here? Am I going over any of my own boundaries? Are there things that I need to do in order to resolve that bottleneck? So if we relate to the problem behaviors that keep us stuck on our journey towards our goals and towards reaching our full potential, what's going to happen is we're just going to get into a tug of war with ourselves, and it's not going to be effective at all. We'll just be fighting with symptoms. But if we look to ourselves with a sense of understanding and compassion and say, oh, there's probably a good reason for this behavior to be coming up, and we understand that at the deepest level, the solutions become obvious. And that is why compassion is such a powerful psychological tool for reaching your full potential. Now that's enough to give you a general understanding of the tool of compassion and why it's so powerful, but I'm going to go a bit deeper into my explanation of what compassion is, because there's a lot of misinformation about compassion out there. It tends to get muddied together with other positive concepts. So first I'm going to tell you what compassion is not, then I'm going to tell you what compassion is. So the first thing that compassion is not is that compassion is not kindness. So kindness can flow downstream as a symptom of compassion. If we're a more compassionate person, we are more likely to be kind to other people. But kindness has to do with our behaviors towards others. Compassion is more about an internal shift where we start to see the world totally differently. And in that internal shift of compassion, we stop condemning and we start understanding. And we start to go towards the deeper root cause reasons why people behave the way they behave, including ourselves. So whenever some kind of practical or ethical problem behavior comes up, instead of going into condemnation, we go into an understanding mode. Like, okay, at some level, this must make sense that this person is behaving this way, or that I'm dealing with this particular type of problem behavior behavior myself. And so what is that root cause reason? Also, another common misconception when I advocate for 100% unconditional compassion towards all people, people might hear that and go like, okay, so we're just going to let everybody off the hook and we're going to enable all kinds of terrible behaviors and we're going to play patty cake with murderers and Nazis and all kinds of other unsavory folk. And no, that's simply not the case. You can absolutely exercise compassion towards someone without interacting with them, without putting yourself in harm's way, without doing acts of kindness or charity for them, without enabling terrible behavior. Compassion is fundamentally about understanding. It's understanding where problem behaviors come from at the deepest roots. And let me emphasize this as a safety note. If there's somebody around you that is really causing you problems and they're very destructive or they're violent behavior, please keep yourself safe, keep yourself at a distance from that person. Please set up proper boundaries because that doesn't negate the practice of 100% unconditional compassion. You don't need 100% unconditional presence or 100% unconditional kindness or niceness toward that person to practice 100% unconditional compassion. Now, in terms of what compassion is understanding, and 100% unconditional compassion is understanding universally that if somebody, including yourself, is displaying some kind of practical or ethical problem behavior, that there is always a good reason for that behavior to be coming about. So those problem behaviors, even if they're the most heinous problem behaviors that you can think of and they're willfully done, are always flowing from some kind of deeper root cause that's more of an ethically neutral root cause. So any problem behaviors displayed by you or other people, whether they be practical problem behaviors that stand in the way of your own productivity, or maybe they're kind of annoying, all the way to the most extreme sadistic behaviors and other types of very destructive behaviors, all of those behaviors are a symptom of a deeper root cause. And the root cause is something that's far more ethically neutral and that is not something that the person themselves chose. For example, let's say that somebody just has a physiology where they can't feel feelings of guilt or remorse, and so they do all kinds of terrible things and they manipulate others and all kinds of things like that. Well, in that example, the root cause is physicality. It's not something that they chose. It's something that those behaviors flow downstream logically of that particular physiological issue. And once that's known, we can actually work on solving the root cause issue if it has a solution. Or let's take another practical example. Let's say that you are dealing with all kinds of self-sabotaging behavior that is holding you back from what it is that you want to do. And so you might go, oh, I'm stupid, I'm lazy, I'm not good enough, and you go into condemnation mode. And condemnation mode is the opposite of compassion. And so condemnation mode just slaps a bad label on things and then blinds you to whatever the solution is. And you go, oh, I'm so bad for not being able to reach my goals. But if you take that lens of compassion and you go, okay, why does this behavior make sense? How am I actually trying to protect or serve myself? What's the reason for this self-sabotage? And if we recognize that it's not coming from some core driver to just mess ourselves over for no reason, and it's flowing forth from some very important reason, we can actually get the answer and we can then resolve that root cause. For example, let's say that somebody's born into a family of many siblings, and when it's the case that they were to achieve something and they were to get the parents' attention because the parents' attention was already scarce, what would happen is it would create all kinds of problems with them and their siblings. And so they would get maybe treated in a very mean way. And there would be jealousy that would be happening between the siblings. And now that they're trying to achieve a big goal, they're dealing with all of this self-sabotage because that part of them is trying to maintain their relationship with their siblings. Because what they learned at a very young age is that success equals disconnection from siblings. So like I said, you can take this in the most practical ways possible and exercise compassion when it comes to practical problem behaviors, but it's the same with ethical problem behaviors. So when you practice 100% unconditional compassion, you start to understand root causes really well, and root causes are where you can actually get the leeway and you can get the traction. But it's very important to recognize that all problem behaviors flow from more ethically neutral places, so there's no core evil driver, there's no core like, oh, I'm going to mess things up for no good reason whatsoever. power. And then also it's recognizing that those wills, even to cause harm, were shaped by forces outside of the person's will. For example, let's say that somebody has a really strong urge to commit acts of violence, and maybe it's come up because of nature factors shaping their will, or maybe nurture factors shaping their will, but neither of those things were chosen by them, and they did not choose to shape their will in a direction where they want to do violence. And if my will or your will is shaped in a direction where we don't want to do violence, well, that's just good luck on our part, right? Our will just didn't happen to get shaped in that way, so we don't have to grapple with violence like this other person does. And so in that, you can exercise compassion towards that violent person by saying like, ooh, that must be a real pain to have to deal with the urge to commit violence all the time. And again, you don't need to interact with this person. You don't need to put yourself in harm's way. It doesn't mean let this person off the hook. Like if they commit an act of violence, they probably should be in jail. All of these things still stand. But if you look at that person from a state of compassion, you can understand that that comes from deeper root causes. And there's a great quote by the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer that goes something like, "A man can do as he wills, but he cannot will as he wills." So what that means is that we all have free will. We can all choose our actions, but we don't choose the will that shapes those actions. So we can do as we will. We can do the things that we want to do and avoid doing the things we don't want to do. We can make choices. We can think about values when we're doing those choices. So it's like, okay, I want to make sure I don't do this thing, and I'm going to make sure I do those things. We can make those choices. But the fact that we want to make those choices, the fact that our will has been shaped in that direction, that comes from nature factors and nurture factors that are totally outside of our control. So if you and I have ended up in any kind of place where we're a kind person, or we're a successful person, or we're an ethical or a moral person, then that is good luck on our part. That's amazing. We don't get to take that too much into our own ego story, because ultimately our will could have been shaped in another direction and we could be struggling with those things. And similarly, we don't condemn other people for what it is that they're dealing with, because the problem behaviors that we can see in ourselves, whatever those happen to be for us and how difficult that is, that's also how difficult other people's problem behaviors are for them, even if those are really egregious problem behaviors that not many people have. And when you take this perspective, what ends up happening is that you end up dropping judgments. So instead of slapping the bad label on somebody or slapping the bad label on yourself, you take the label off, and now your eyes can see. And now you can actually see what's going on with that person, and you can see what's going on with yourself. Condemnation causes you to close your eyes, but compassion enables you to see at the deepest level, and that's where solutions become evident. So I wanted to share with you some personal anecdotes from some medicine journeys where I was taught some things about compassion. And one of the things that I would mention is that I recommend the practice of 100% unconditional compassion, and I say that it's a practice because it's always imperfect. Judgments will come up, condemnations will come up, but we just aim to practice 100% unconditional compassion to keep ourselves in that perspective where the solutions are obvious. But in these medicine journeys, I experienced near perfect compassion, where judgment was simply impossible. And so in the first one, it was just a very subtle shift into a deeper understanding of why people behave the way they behave. And in this journey, the medicine brought to mind somebody that I might typically judge or have a very strong aversive reaction to, really a group of people. And it's basically kind of like online misogynists, and that would be something that would really get under my skin. And it brought these misogynistic guys into my perspective, and I could look at them and I could see the surface level problem behaviors, but I could see the deeper vulnerabilities that those surface level behaviors were coming from. And the issue before was that I was making their behaviors too much about me, because oftentimes they scapegoat women, like that's the whole thing. But so I was looking more at the symptom, and it's easy to condemn somebody when it comes to the symptom, especially if that symptom is coming at you in a negative way. But in this, it was just really obvious what all the vulnerabilities were, and I just felt a lot of compassion towards this group of people, and I could really see what was making those behaviors tick. And while I'm still very unlikely to make a close friend with somebody who's going to operate that way in relation to me, so it's not about friendship or kindness or anything like that, I now understand what causes that problem, and it seems like the solution is quite obvious. And while somebody who's already in it might not be helpable, somebody who might potentially fall into it in the future, like kids and things like that, who might be, sort of susceptible to that kind of propaganda, they can be helped. And so now the solution is more obvious. So in exercising that compassion, we start to see the root cause of the problem instead of just fighting with the symptoms. Then I had a really awesome experience in another medicine journey that had to do with unconditional compassion. And so the way that I would describe it is that I was myself sitting on the mat within the ceremony, but then I was also superimposed with like this divine intelligence that was also sitting there. So I was like one with the divine intelligence. And there was a big stack of holographic papers on my lap. Mind you, I should mention that this is a hallucinogenic substance, so it would be quite common to see visions like this. But basically, there was a stack of papers on my lap, and it was holographic, it was see-through, and there was all of this strange writing that wasn't in any particular human language. Like, it didn't look like any characters that I've ever seen before, and it looked like they were written in like iridescent gel pen on every single one of those papers in the stack, and there was probably thousands of papers in the stack. And it was very interesting because I could look through the top of this see-through paper on top, and I could see all the rest of the layers and all of the rest of the words. And what the divine intelligence that I was superimposed with would do is that they would bring up somebody that I know in my mind, and I would look down at this big stack of papers on top, and I would almost like read the whole thing in one moment. And in that reading the whole thing in one moment, I would understand exactly why it was that a person operated the way that they did, in the positive, negative, and neutral sense. It's like I could look at this stack of papers and I could understand all of the factors that shape their behavior and shape their personality. And then what was interesting is I could turn the stack of papers on the side and I could look through the side of the papers. And in looking through the side of the papers, I could see little characters in the writing that had gotten out of alignment. So there was mostly alignment when I looked, but then it was like there were like a few characters that would be hanging off of like each page, and it was like, oh, those are the things that have gotten knocked out of alignment for them, and that's why they have this problem behavior, that's why they have that problem behavior. And I did this with quite a few people, and I can't remember all the people that I did where I just like saw the reason why the person was the way that they were. But then my dad came to mind, and I just remember I looked at the thing and I just got this really holistic sense of like why he behaves the way that he behaves, like what shaped his personality, what's caused him to behave positively this way and negatively that way. And I looked at the side of the paper where I could see all the things that had gotten out of alignment, and I was like, oh, that's why he does this thing and that's why he does that thing. And I just felt this overall sense of gratitude that he's my dad. And it's like, oh wow, this whole being was so amazing, and I could see like every little thing that shaped this person. And so it was like I loved the whole entire book, but then I could also see little areas where things had gotten out of alignment, and it made perfect sense, and I could exercise perfect compassion towards him and towards the other people that I thought of in that journey during that experience. So I wanted to share both of these with you, to just share with you how profound the practice of compassion is in terms of just widening your awareness and your consciousness of what's going on with yourself and what's going on with others. And when you can see things plainly like that, the solutions become obvious. Now, just really quick, I wanted to mention that I have a free webinar called 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight with Yourself. So if you want to check that out, that's down below in the description box. There's a link there. You can put in your email and access the webinar immediately. And in that webinar, I even have a simple question that you can ask yourself to immediately understand yourself at a deeper level. And that question is rooted in the practice of compassion. So I highly recommend checking it out. So compassion, and specifically 100% unconditional compassion, is a mode of operating and a state of consciousness where you can drop judgments and condemnations towards yourself and others, and this enables you to see what the deeper root causes of problems are, and it also enables you to come up with realistic cures for those problems. Now, the opposite of compassion is condemnation, and condemnation is basically where we just slap a label that says bad on things, and then we close the book and we don't look any deeper. Oh yeah, that person's just bad. I'm just bad. That person is just lame. Fundamentally, there's a flaw at the baseline of their existence, and yeah, I don't need to look any deeper. And what ends up happening is that we don't understand the root causes of problems, and so we end up just fighting the symptoms. And so condemnation begets a kind of ignorance and then inflates us for being good, condemns them from being bad, and then we can only understand things at this very shallow surface level. And the issue is that human beings have a really long history of slapping the label of badness or evilness onto things that they don't understand. And when that happens, surface level solutions like just defeat the evildoers, lock them all in prison, kill them all, that becomes the solution. And we can see all kinds of terrible things that grow out of that condemnation mindset. So to take this back before the times of the scientific revolution, many cultures across the globe thought that illness, physical illness, came from things like witchcraft or punishments from God. And so there were either ineffective solutions to those illnesses, or there would even be a punitive sense of like, oh, you deserve this illness because you committed this sin and now God is punishing you. And so in order for us to actually get a more empirical understanding of what people were going through with their illnesses, and to be able to allow in a more neutral lens like science to be able to study the situation, a person had to say, okay, there must be some good reason why this is happening. If this person is afflicted by this, it's not because they have some character flaw or because there was some evil affecting them. Instead, there must be some reason underneath the surface why this person has gotten sick, and it's something that's morally neutral, and we can find what that solution is. And the solution is morally neutral, and it's not something that this person chose to have or did anything or was guilty of anything to have. Instead, we just need to find what that solution is. What's going on with this person's body that's creating this illness? Now, as modern people, most of us look at this and go, oh my gosh, can you believe people being so superstitious to associate evil with illness? Clearly, there is something going on that has nothing to do with that person's inherent character. But when someone is afflicted by something that affects their psychology or their behavior, we still go into superstitious evil territory. And that causes us to condemn that person and to put blinders on when it comes to understanding the root causes, and then we come up with ineffective solutions for dealing with those problems. So for example, let's take Nazis in World War II. And I know that for a long time, for myself and for others, it was just like, oh yeah, those were just like bad people. They were just terrible people. They went along with like what Hitler was doing. And yeah, we would never do that. Those people were monsters, but we're good people, so we would never go down that path. And I remember even thinking, oh, there must have been something different about people back in the 30s and 40s that caused them to go that way. So that's the condemnation way of dealing with Nazis. And ultimately, when you ascribe the problem of Nazis to the problem of evil, the only solution is just get rid of the Nazis, throw them in prison, kill them, that sort of thing. But then that's like cutting off the head of a hydra, because the problem just grows back and it grows back worse later on. But if we look at Nazis through the lens of 100% unconditional compassion, we can understand the psychological and emotional motives that cause a person to start following an authoritarian regime like that. And in fact, there was a great study that was done in the 1950s by people who were asking that very same question. So they had to get to a place of compassion where they go like, okay, why is it understandable that somebody becomes a Nazi? What's the factors involved that make becoming a Nazi something that's a logical outgrowth of those factors? And what they found is that the main unifying theme to what made a person more susceptible to becoming a Nazi is that they were raised with authoritarian parents. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. When you have a demagogue that comes up and says, hey, I'm the supreme leader, follow me, it's going to be familiar to them. It's going to match the parenting style that they were raised with. And it's going to be like, oh, I can finally be approved of by my parents via following this dictator. Essentially what demagogues do, and Adolf Hitler was no different, is that they know how to speak to the audience to activate and trigger old wounds, old patterns, their own, let's say, familiar past, the way that they interacted with parents, and then they know how to weaponize that to get people moving in the direction of very, very evil, egregious things. And that's not as to excuse anyone, it's like I'm glad the Nuremberg trials happened. I'm glad that so many people were held to account for the atrocities they were responsible for. But when we look through the lens of compassion, we start to see are there ways that we could maybe change our parenting styles in order to cut down on the possibility of Nazism retaking a hold in the current day? But we can actually see the root cause, and we can kind of say if Nazism comes mostly from authoritarian parenting, parenting, are there ways that we can actually teach people to be better parents that don't operate in an authoritarian way towards their kids, but instead have a deep, compassionate understanding towards their kids instead, so that they're not vulnerable to a demagogue coming along and getting them radicalized in the direction of some authoritarian regime. Now, in those particular examples, the focus was more on ethical problem behaviors, but we can apply this same kind of lens to practical problem behaviors, either done by ourselves or done by others. And we can even look at ourselves with a condemnation lens whenever it's the case that we're dealing with something that might on the surface level look like laziness or self-sabotage. And instead of actually finding the real solution through looking through the lens of compassion towards ourselves when we're dealing with these problems, instead we go into condemnation mode and we say, oh, I'm just lazy, I'm fundamentally weak, I'm fundamentally lame, I'm fundamentally bad. And then we think the solution is to gain more control over ourselves or be really harsh to ourselves, talk to ourselves really negatively. And it's the idea that if we shame ourselves hard enough, we're just going to get better. But I'd say that that's just as superstitious and ineffective as believing that somebody is dealing with an illness because they were a bad person and got cursed. So let's say that you're on this journey of self-actualization, you're trying to reach your full potential, you're trying to achieve your goals, and you stall out along the way. So let's say that we'll use a metaphor here. So let's say that you're driving a car, your car stalls out. And instead of seeking to understand the problem deeply, you're like, oh, this car is just fundamentally a piece of junk. It's terrible. It's like awful. There's something fundamentally about this car that's like evil and bad and wrong. And then we beat up on the car trying to make it go. Well, if we see this happening, and somebody's operating that way in relation to their car, we're going to be like, that person is crazy. But this is the way that we tend to operate towards ourselves when we stall out towards our big goal. We instead go like, oh no, there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and how do I get mean enough to myself to control myself and to rid myself of that badness or wrongness? Instead, what we want to do in the car metaphor is we want to operate like a good mechanic. It's okay, if the car has stalled out, there's a variety of reasons why it could be that the car is stalled out. And so I'm going to, as the good mechanic, look underneath the hood and check everything out to see what's going on with it. And if I'm a good mechanic, I'm going to know that there has to be some problem with the car. It doesn't just stall out for no reason. And it certainly hasn't stalled out because it's an evil car that's just trying to mess you over. So this is what the practice of 100% unconditional compassion allows us to do for ourselves. It allows us to actually look underneath the hood of why it is that we're stalling out on the road toward our goals, and we can look at it and go, look, okay, there must be something going on underneath the hood. And because of that, there must be a solution or some logical way to look at this where the problem is more workable. And so from that perspective, there's no inherent self-sabotage, there's no inherent laziness. None of those are root causes. Those are symptoms. The root causes are something that you have to explore and discover so that you can actually solve the problem. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be sharing with you a simple and effective practice for being able to utilize compassion in your favor on your journey towards your big goals. But first, I wanted to mention that if you're somebody who's very ambitious and you have big goals, but you're dealing with procrastination and self-sabotage and all kinds of other things that are holding you back from your full potential, I do offer support with that, and I can help you to identify and to resolve those issues that are holding you back. So if that's something that you think you might be interested in, go ahead and click the link down below in the description box, and there you can apply to work with me. Okay, so here's what you can do to incorporate the practice of 100% unconditional compassion to help you reach your full potential. So the first thing to do is to shift to embodying the perspective of all behaviors come rationally and logically from some deeper root cause reason. And that deeper root cause is something that's ethically neutral, not a fundamental flaw, not a fundamental evil. And it's also not something that that person consciously chose. And that includes yourself and others. So again, like Schopenhauer said, a person can do as they will, they cannot will as they will. So your will has been shaped by forces outside of your control. Other people's will has been shaped by forces outside of their control. So if you have problem behaviors or other people have problem behaviors, there's some kind of logical reason why things have gotten out of alignment that way, and they didn't consciously choose to get out of alignment. Now, the second thing is to practice 100% unconditional compassion unconditionally. That means that we're not making excuses exceptions for the very worst people and saying, okay, I can be compassionate toward good people, but bad people, I'm not going to be compassionate toward. So as I had mentioned, compassion is about a mindset shift. And in order to really have that mindset shift, it is a totally different way of looking at the world. And so if you're making exceptions, then you're not going to be able to make that shift into that other paradigm. But as I mentioned, you can and should create a lot of distance between yourself and anybody who would cause you harm. And it doesn't mean letting those people slide or letting them off the hook or anything like that. It's just recognizing that the problem behaviors you have and the problem behaviors other people have are a natural outgrowth of physical limitations, blind spots, ignorance, traumas, unmet needs, coping strategies. All these things come together to mangle people's will in a certain direction. And if one's will happens to be mangled in certain directions, certain behaviors will come up as symptoms of their will being mangled in that direction. And so in the same way that people eventually realized that physical maladies were something that people weren't choosing and that there are external factors at play, it's the same thing when it comes to people's character and people's choices. And again, that doesn't mean accountability goes away, but if we want to shift into the state of 100% unconditional compassion to be able to see the real root causes of those problems, we have to recognize that those behaviors are logical from their perspective. We have to see that those behaviors make sense given the way that their will has been shaped. Now, as a side note here, I want to emphasize that even though we're aiming at 100% unconditional compassion, it's a practice. It is not perfect. And so even though I've been practicing 100% unconditional compassion a long time, I still have judgments arise. I still go into the condemnation mindset. There's still those patterns. And instead, what I do in those cases, and what I recommend that you do as well, is to look at those with the same lens of compassion and go like, instead of condemning the judgment, say, oh, interesting, there's a judgment there. There must be a deeper underlying reason why that judgment is coming up. And then from there, you can actually work through those judgments at the roots. Like, is that judgment meant to protect or serve you in some kind of way? Now, the next thing you want to do is whenever you run into some kind of bottleneck on your journey or you're dealing with some kind of self-sabotaging behavior, what you want to do is you want to get into the frame of the mechanic. So when we take the frame of the mechanic, what we do is we see that the body and the mind are like a vehicle. And if that vehicle is malfunctioning in some way or getting in the way of what it is that we want to do, we have to actually look underneath the hood. We have to figure out what's going on. And so the bad mechanic goes like, oh, this is just a terrible vehicle. There's something fundamentally wrong with it. But the good mechanic gets curious and goes, okay, let's look under the hood. So, okay, if I'm stalling out on my path, like what's the reason? It's like, it's not because of some fundamental laziness or character flaw that I have. It's just like, what's going on underneath the hood? You know, do I need to change a fuse? You know, is there a problem with the engine? You know, is there a problem with the carburetor? You know, so the way that a mechanic would look at things is the same way that you want to look at like your inner world and be like, okay, well, what's the issue? What's holding me back? Am I going over my own boundaries? Do I have a need that's unmet? Is there some kind of limiting belief that's there? Am I going in the direction that I actually want to go in? So getting into the frame of the mechanic is where you can start to use that compassion to see the actual root causes of problems, and then you can formulate the antidote. And so compassion enables you to figure out what the actual cure to the thing is. So it's like if we are condemning an illness as like bad and evil and wrong and oh, shame on the illness, shame on the person for having the illness, we're never going to cure it. Whereas if we go like, okay, this illness is probably coming from some factor that has nothing to do with that person's character at all. So like, what's the actual thing that's causing it? Now, when you're looking through the lens of the mechanic, one of the most common problems that you'll see that will hold you back are your limiting beliefs. And so if you want to learn more about how to let go of limiting beliefs, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.